Hello everyone, welcome to StudyIQ. So we will continue our discussion on economy. In the previous session, we have discussed about inflation. We have seen the different types of inflation. So what is inflation? It is actually the persistent increase in price level over a period of time. So we have understood what is inflation, we have understood what is demand pull inflation, and we have also understood what is cost push inflation. So what are the reasons for demand pull inflation we have seen? What are the reasons for cost push inflation we have seen? And the various monetary policies, fiscal policies, supply side management measures, etc. that you take to control the demand pull inflation as well as cost push inflation we have seen. We have also seen the positive as well as negative impacts of inflation, and then we have discussed about different types of measurement of inflation. We have talked about WPI, wholesale price index. We have also discussed about CPI, the consumer price index. We have discussed about 10 types of consumer price index. Okay, then we have talked about service price index. We have talked about producers price index. So we have seen from wholesaler point of view, retailer point of view, and also producer point of view. Okay, and finally we have discussed about base effect. So this is what we have done so far. If you have any doubt, you can get in touch with me here. If you missed out any of the video, watch that video. It will be available in the Telegram channel. Okay, so if you have any doubts related to, if you need classes related to SEBI, NABARD, RBI, UPSC Civil Services, you can get in touch with me here. So today's session will be talking about the related terms of inflation and its related terms. So I'll be starting with inflation itself, as we have already started. What is inflation? Inflation is actually the persistent increase in price level. So persistent increase in price level. So that is what inflation. We have already understood this is the situation. Let's say this is aggregate demand, this is aggregate supply, so this is national income, this is price level. So what is inflation? I'm talking about demand pull inflation now. So the demand, aggregate demand is increased, so the demand curve shift rightward. You can see here there is an increase in prices. So this is what inflation generally is because of demand. Okay, so the advantage you can see here, national income also increased. So a moderate level of inflation is actually very good because it comes up with growth. This we have already understood. Okay, so second term, disinflation. So disinflation means deflation is opposite of inflation. Disinflation is not the opposite. It is actually a reduction in inflation. Okay, so reduction in the rate of inflation. That means now when you calculate 10% means there is a reduction, 9%, 8%, 5%, etc. because of certain monetary policies and fiscal measures that have been undertaken by the government and the central bank. And it is actually a positive because the measures that we have taken is effective. Okay, it is giving some result. So when disinflation is there, it is showing the reduction in rate of inflation. What is the advantage now? RBI can reduce the interest rate, RBI can reduce the reserve requirements. All these will create credit creation capacity, and it will promote investment, it will promote capital formation, and it will boost the growth. Okay, so it actually stimulates growth. So it is a situation in which price level reduces without any adverse impact on national income. Okay, so national income is not affected. Obviously output, employment, etc. won't be affected. So it is desirable. Now for this only we are taking different measures, monetary policy measures and fiscal policy measures, etc. that we are doing for this only. Disinflation means rate of inflation is coming down. Why? Now the advantage is you can reduce the interest rates, you can reduce the reserve requirements, so it is beneficial for the economy. Next is important, that is opposite to inflation. Third one, deflation. Okay, so deflation is opposite of inflation. Inflation was the persistent increase in price level. Here persistent decrease in price level. So persistent decrease in price level. So this is negative inflation, that is negative inflation. Okay, so is it desirable? It is not desirable. Why? It leads to recession. The reason is it is coming along with a decrease in growth. So growth will be affected drastically because no demand. This is a situation where there is no demand. So it is opposite to inflation. You can see, I'll show you here in graph. So let's say national income, this is the price level. So just like we have discussed aggregate demand, aggregate supply demand curve shift is now downward sloping, supply curve is upward sloping, demand curve, now demand is less, opposite to the other situation. So demand curve, instead of shifting rightward in case of increase, here now it will shift leftward. So let me show the leftward shift of demand curve. There is a equilibrium position. Okay, now how to show the leftward shift? This is the demand curve, so demand curve shift leftward. So what is the new point now? There is a new equilibrium point. So you can see here there is a reduction in prices. But what is the problem? You can see here problem is national income also came down. Okay, national income came down here. So this is not desirable. That is why I told you it is opposite of inflation. A moderate level of inflation is always good. It promotes growth, it promotes employment opportunities, it reduces unemployment rate, it reduces poverty. In all these ways, a moderate level of inflation is actually good in the economy. It shows a positive sentiment in the economy. It creates a positive market sentiment, and that promotes investment, that promotes capital formation, that promotes growth. Okay. So this is deflation, opposite of inflation, that is not desirable in the economy. Next is reflation. It is a situation in which, let me write down first, it is a situation in which price level increases along with output, employment, etc. when economy recovers from recession. So when an economy recovered from recession, so here in the previous case I've told you it is going towards recession. So when an economy recovers from recession, that is what you call as reflation. It is a situation in which price level increases along with output. It is actually inflation because price level is increasing, output is also increasing. This is what you can see in case of inflation also. But here it is coming out of recession. Earlier it was coming out of normal situation. During a normal situation the price is increasing, that is inflation. During a recession time what is happening, that is reflation. That's it. Both are actually simple. The process is simple. The timing is different. Next is stagflation. Okay. So other sets, stagflation. So stagflation means it's actually stagnation plus inflation. So here inflation at the time of recession. Recession is there, at the same time inflation is there. Recession means low growth, no growth, inflation is there. Reflation is different. Growth is increasing, the price level is also increasing. Here stagflation means there is a stagnation and inflation. So here inflation plus recession. Recession means no demand, so unemployment situation you can see. So this is exactly opposite of Phillips curve. If you remember, we have discussed about Phillips curve. So inflation increases means unemployment will come down. We have seen this Phillips curve, right? So this is the Phillips curve. So here unemployment, here inflation. So you can see at this point higher inflation, unemployment is less. Here lower inflation, unemployment is high. So it is exactly opposite. Inflation is there, at the same time recession is also there. Okay, unemployment is there. So let me write down. It is a situation in which high inflation is accompanied by recession. That means unemployment. Okay. So usual situation, unemployment rate will be 3 to 4%. We have discussed that already when we discussed about unemployment chapter. We have seen the usual status unemployment. We have seen current weekly status, current daily status, usual principal status, usual subsidiary status. All those cases we have discussed. So you have seen that already. It is between this. If it is going beyond this 4%, that is happening only during the time of recession. So that shows actually recession. So it is caused due to cost push inflation. Okay. The cost of production is more. So during this situation, this will be there. In 1973, because of oil shock. Okay, there was a stagflation in most of the countries because it is affecting the supply, it is affecting the cost of production. Most of the countries affected, India was also affected. So Phillips curve, as I have told you here, here you can see here, in the situation of stagflation, Phillips curve failed. So there was a discussion in 1970s that leads to change in theories. So now, you know, Phillips curve does not exist as it failed. But for a short term, this may work out. Phillips curve is okay. Phillips curve is true, but long term this won't be there. Okay, so when stagflation is there, Phillips curve fail because both are opposite. I hope you understood this. Stagflation, inflation, at the same time unemployment is also there. But Phillips saying when inflation is there, unemployment will come down. So this is contrary. So during the situation of stagflation, Phillips curve fail. And now Phillips curve does not exist, but theoretically you need to know this, but short term it will work out, not long term. Okay. The next one, misery index. Okay, so misery index is actually nothing but inflation rate plus unemployment rate, both will be added, so that give you the misery. So inflation rate plus unemployment rate. Let's say unemployment is 4% and inflation is, let's say, 8%. What is the misery index? 12%. Okay, so this is commonly used in developed countries, not much used in developing countries, because in developing countries there are many other miseries than this. Okay, so I hope you understood this three. So stagflation, if this is, let's say, marking as 1, and Phillips curve 2, misery index, let me mark as 3. So what is this? Misery index is an index, right? So that is a index. The third one is actually an index. What about the second one? Second one is a hypothesis. Second one is a hypothesis. What is the first one? Stagflation. That is the actual situation. So that shows the situation. And when the situation is there, hypothesis is actually failed. So that led to rejection of this theory. So this theory does not exist. So I hope these three are actually connected. These three, stagflation, Phillips curve and misery index, all the three are connected. Connected with what? Inflation and unemployment. In all the three we are talking about inflation and unemployment. Here inflation plus unemployment in this index. Here inflation and unemployment, what relation? Reverse relation. Here inflation plus, at the same time unemployment is there, that is what stagflation. Now this one, all are connected, right? Inflation, disinflation, deflation, reflation, all these four are connected. These three are connected. This is how you can remember. Inflation, disinflation, deflation, reflation, all the four are connected. And Phillips curve, stagflation, misery index, all the three are connected. How it is connected? Unemployment and inflation. Now we will go for next one. Inflationary gap. Inflationary gap. See, inflationary gap is actually the gap between demand and supply. See, why inflation is there? Excess demand is there. So what is the aggregate demand in the economy? If this demand is more than the aggregate supply, if you take at the full productive capacity level, then that is what? It's simple. It is like this only. Let's say aggregate demand is 150 crore and aggregate supply is 100 crore only. So there is a gap. This is aggregate supply at full employment level. Okay, so that gap, 50 crore gap, is what? Inflationary gap. So you can write here, it is a situation in which aggregate demand is more than productive capacity of an economy. So the economy is having certain productive capacity, and if the demand and the productive capacity is equal, it is in an equilibrium position, no problem. But if the demand is more, what will happen? So what is the equilibrium position? You can show here, this is the equilibrium position. But now if the gap is more, what will happen? This will shift rightwards, so that lead to actually inflation, and this gap is what? The inflationary gap. So that lead to inflation. Now deflationary gap, it is exactly the opposite. Deflationary gap. Okay, so here aggregate demand will be lesser than supply. So more supply is there. So this you can see in developing countries, demand is more, supply is less because infrastructure is less. Okay, but in developed countries, deflationary gap is what you can see. Supply is more, the production is more, investment is more, infrastructure is better, but demand is less. Okay, and they do this quantitative easing and all those things to create demand in the economy. So developed countries, there is problem with demand. Developing countries, there is never a problem with demand. The problem of demand will never occur in developing countries. Demand is rather always high because of population and many other reasons. Okay, so here aggregate demand will be less than aggregate supply at full employment level. Let's say supply is 100 crore and demand is, let's say, 60 crore worth. So this is what you are showing at supply. Okay, so what will happen here in this situation? Prices will come down, right? Because demand is not there, so price will come down. So price will come down means automatically production will come down. So to increase demand, the developed countries will go for different measures like quantitative easing, as we have discussed before. I hope this is clear. So they need to create demand in the economy. So this lead to deflation and recession. See, the first case is desirable. A moderate level of inflationary gap is desirable because that shows demand is higher than the supply. Otherwise, there is no demand in the economy, means that is going to affect the growth. So I hope this is clear. So this is mostly in developed countries. The first one you will see in developing countries. Second one you will never see in developing countries. In developing countries, there can never be an increase in supply compared to the demand. No, not possible. Okay. Next one, suppressed or repressed inflation. Suppressed or repressed inflation. So it is a situation in which aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply, but what the government will do, demand is more than supply. So if demand is more than supply, inflation will be there. But what the government will do, but government prevents price increase, price level from rising through direct control measures like ceiling prices. So what you're actually doing, see, if you leave it to the market, when supply is less and demand is more, there are people who are ready to pay, and they will pay more, and automatically in the market prices will shoot up. But this is suppressed or repressed by the government action by fixing the ceiling. But this is theoretically only happen, otherwise in black market all those things it will not work out. As long as you don't have an organized market. In developing countries it is very difficult, as there is no proper records are maintained, black marketing is there. So it's difficult in developing countries, but that is what suppressed inflation. Demand is there, supply is less, so prices will go up. Rather than going up so high, government will prevent it, suppress it by fixing the ceiling price. Simple as that. Okay, so suppressed. Next is open inflation. Open inflation. It is a situation in which price level increases without any price suppressive measure by the government. So it is a persistent increase in price level over a period of time. It is similar to the definition of inflation. So when we talk about inflation, we generally talk about open inflation. So open inflation means simply inflation. There is an aggregate demand, there is aggregate supply. This demand is more than the supply, so prices will go up, but government is not suppressed or repressed. Okay, so when we talk about inflation, we generally talk about open inflation. See, inflation suppression and controlling inflation are different. Don't be confused. When this open inflation is there, what you will do? You will try to control. How will you control? You will use monetary policy measures and fiscal policy measures and supply side measures. What you will do? You will try to reduce demand, because high demand is a problem, so you'll try to reduce demand. How will you reduce demand? You will reduce money supply. So the objective here is reducing money supply. So this is control, price control or inflation control. Now reduce demand or you increase supply. These are the two measures which you can do to control inflation. Suppressed inflation is direct. This is direct action. You are fixing the price. There is no monetary policy or fiscal policy or supply side things are involved. You are fixing the price. So I hope you understood the difference. Suppressing inflation and controlling is entirely different. Next is structural or bottleneck inflation. Structural or bottleneck inflation. So it is caused due to some structural deficiencies like power problem, infrastructure problem, etc. Okay, so it is due to structural deficiencies of an economy, like scarcity of capital, infrastructural bottlenecks, market imperfection, etc. Okay, next is Stagflation. Stagflation. It refers to a situation of uneven increase in price level. So basically agriflation, or next is agriflation. So what is this? Increase in prices of agricultural commodities. So this is what? Food inflation basically. Okay, so I hope these three are easy. There is no point in explaining too much here. Structural or bottleneck inflation because of the problem, scarcity of capital, infrastructural bottlenecks, etc. Okay, so power failures, all these are reasons. Stagflation, situation in which uneven increase in price level. Agriflation, that name itself will tell you. Okay, next is core inflation. Very important. It is based on prices of only those commodities whose prices are not volatile. So those items whose prices are not volatile, those items will come in core inflation, the core items which won't change drastically. So here, which one you will exclude? You will exclude food, fuel, fertilizers, etc. So food, fuel, fertilizers, etc. will not be part of core inflation. Okay, so this is basically used to know the trend only. So generally food, fuel, when we talk about core inflation, because these are highly volatile. So I hope you understood core inflation, those items which are not volatile. Next is headline inflation. Headline inflation. So it is basically based on all types of or groups of commodities. Okay, so it is based on prices of all types of commodities. So generally we use this headline inflation. Okay, now next is creeping inflation. I'm moving faster, time problem. Creeping inflation. So it is basically low inflation. So up to 3%. Up to 3% is creeping inflation. So it is better to say low. It is not preferred to say this particular value. This 3%, when we say in the context of India, it is low. But when we say in the context of UK, it is so high. This 3% itself is so high. So when it comes to India, as per Urjit Patel committee, 4% is the desirable, ideal rate, targeted rate of inflation. So 3% means it is low, it is good. But when it comes to UK, their target is actually 2%. Okay, because their supply is elastic over there. So 4% is so high, but that means when supply is elastic in developed countries, the inflation tendency is very less. Supply is more. So 4% is so high, they target 2%. So this is, when I say low, that is fine, rather than going for this particular number. Next is walking or trotting inflation. So this is moderate or moderately high inflation. Moderate. Trotting means horse walks. Okay. So moderate or moderately high. That means 3 to 7% inflation. Third one, running inflation. So I would say high inflation. That means 7 to 10% or up to 7% or 10%. Next is galloping inflation. Galloping inflation, very high inflation. This same 7 to 10% you can write there. Okay, so some books it is written that galloping and running are same, and the percentage this also same. High and very high together they have written. So I am writing it as 2, but you can study these as together, galloping, running. Okay. Next one, fifth one, runaway. This is dangerous. Runaway or hyperinflation. Okay. So this is extremely high inflation. So here the entire monetary system will collapse, like what happened in case of Zimbabwe, etc. Extremely high inflation. So here monetary system collapse. So that leads to problems. So during hyperinflation or runaway inflation, the situation is not desirable because the money value will come down very drastically, and if you need to get even a piece of bread, you need to go with a suitcase of currency. And in fact, the suitcase cost will be much more than the currency which is there in the suitcase. So that situation is not desirable. People trust on the government, the entire monetary system will go. So that is not desirable. That is a very bad situation. And Argentina, Zimbabwe, before Germany, all these countries have faced this problem. So that's about today's session. I hope you understood. If you have any doubt, you can get in touch with me here. You can join the Telegram channel. You'll get all my videos over there. If you need any classes, SEBI, RBI, NABARD, etc., get in touch with me here. I can help you out there. Okay. So see you guys. Thank you.